Hello, everybody. Welcome back to House Parties. Joey is here once again.
Hello.
Welcome back, Joey, to the couch. Glad that you are here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. We are going to start by telling you the sponsors of this house party video. This house party video is sponsored by my dog, Potato. She likes to jump on people and eat her own poop. My dog, Potato. Who else is sponsoring this video, Joey?
Artificial cherry flavoring. Have you ever just had the craving for cough syrup, like the taste of cough syrup? Or just, frankly, just want a flavor that nobody likes? Well, there you have it. Artificial cherry flavor.
There you go. Those are our sponsors. You know, I have been enjoying cherry Starburst. Normally I hate cherry flavored things, but for me, that's the exception.
There's like a chewiness that comes with it, I think. With Starburst, there's like the chewy enjoyment factor.
It's tart.
Yeah.
It's tart.
There are candies that I can give an exception to, like Jolly Rancher cherries.
Yeah.
Those are some of the best ones.
Yeah. Isn't this exciting? This is great. Okay.
Okay, we have
Mark.
Yep, but before that we have announcements.
Oh yeah,
and
announcements before Mark.
An update on the turtle. Announcements. We got a student night coming up in a couple of weeks. So get ready for that. It's gonna be really good.
Ask your friends to come.
Yep.
We love to see your friends.
Yep.
We love to see you too.
Yeah. By the way, you can invite your friends to house parties too.
That's right.
It's a really great option for some of your friends. It might even be an easier thing for them to come to instead of this big room filled with strangers and you. So think about it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's someone in your life that could really use a group of friends at the very least. Not to mention some really good discussion about Jesus and stuff like that. We have an update on the adventures of Master Oogway, affectionately known by some as Jessica. So on our ongoing adventure, Master Oogway finds himself hurtling down Rainbow Road at breakneck speeds, thanks to Bowser mistaking him for a green shell. The skies are painted with vibrant hues as Oogway's unlikely companion Bowser try to outrun an onslaught of skittle projectiles from a leprechaun riding an emu-pulled carriage. If this is your first time here, welcome. But in a daring move, we decided to toss a banana peel onto the Rainbow Road. The consequences are nothing short of spectacular as the banana peel hits the colorful surface that unleashes chaos. The first emu, unaware of the slippery peril ahead, loses its footing and careens in a wild dance of feathers and flailing legs. The carriage lurches forward, so it's like if it's going this way and it hits the banana, it's like, boom, like that, like a hammer, and shattering the Rainbow Road beneath the carriage and Bowser's cart, sending our beloved turtle tumbling into the abyss. As they fall, Master Oogway's keen eyes spot two different dimensional wormholes, each with its own unique allure. Now, it's time for us to make a choice of what Oogway will do. Two options. A, Oogway decides to transform himself into a blue shell, targeting the first place racer Bowser, who is plummeting into a dimension that shimmers with a prismatic light, promising a world made entirely of colorful bricks where everything is interconnected and waiting to be built or dismantled. Maybe it's Wisconsin. Or B, Oogway decides to brace himself for the unknown of the second wormhole. It appears as a swirling vortex of darkness and eerie whispers, beckoning with the promise of a spooky dimension filled with mysteries and ghostly encounters. That reminds me of Pueblo, Colorado. You have to choose which one Oogway directs himself into. So maybe stop right here, figure that out, or we can move on. That has been the update on Master Oogway.
Okay, now we are going to get into the book of Mark. So, this is an interesting section. And again, Our goal in this, and thank you for being here, Joey. Again, I'm really glad that you're here. The goal in this is we're not trying to explain this whole thing to you, but it's more fun if you guys get to kind of like figure it out yourselves. But sometimes there's a lot of context that isn't super clear, and it might be a lot easier for you to kind of dig into this if you know some of the things. Just a bit of a recap of where we're at in the life of Jesus. Jesus showed up, he gets baptized by John, the Holy Spirit comes down, the voice of God says, "This is my son," and then he starts his ministry. He goes out into the wilderness and survives and comes back, and he chooses his disciples, and he performs these incredible miracles. And then he calls this dude named Levi, who is just the scum of the earth as far as everyone's concerned, but he says to him, "Follow me." And then he does this other miracle with this guy lowered through the roof, and we kind of get a picture of the bigger thing that Jesus is here doing. He is here to conquer and defeat sin and cure the disease, not just take care of the symptoms of the disease, but he actually wants to change things. And this kind of bothers the Pharisees and the people hearing it because he's shaking things up a bit. And in this next section, he's going to do some things that kind of shake things up a bit even more and bother some people a little bit more. So you're going to be looking at Mark chapter 2, verses 18 through 28. And you'll be reading this together. But before you do that, we just thought we'd share a little bit about kind of like what maybe we saw or questions that we had when we first kind of looked into this. So Joey, I'm really curious kind of like your thoughts, your curiosities, your questions. What do you think, man?
Yeah, right off the bat, we're seeing some lines Jesus says, because he's approached by these people who see the Pharisees fasting, and they ask him, "Why aren't you fasting like John's disciples and the Pharisees are? Like, why are you doing different things?" And Jesus says, "Do wedding guests fast while celebrating with the groom? Of course not. They can't fast while the groom is with them, but someday the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast." This was pretty confusing for me right off the bat, because I'm like, what does a wedding have to do with any of this? Like, nobody asked, But he's simply saying, that the Pharisees grew up learning this tradition. They've been deeply ingrained, and it's part of who they are, and they teach other people to follow these traditions so that they can be, saved in the eyes of God. And Jesus comes to usher in this new tradition. Jesus also says here that who would patch old clothing with new cloth? Because if the new patch would shrink and then it would rip away from the old cloth, then there's an even bigger hole than there originally was.
Yeah.
So, a newer, healthier tradition is being ushered in, and get us started anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he's saying a lot of things that would make sense a lot back then. I mean, if you do it the reverse way, if Jesus talked back then about TikTok, everyone would be really confused. He's talking about things that everybody knew about back then that are really confusing to today. So the whole groom thing or bridegroom, a bridegroom is just a groom. It's the dude in the wedding, okay? What would happen back then is if a man wanted to marry a woman, he would propose and pay this chunk of money to the family as kind of this act of respect. And everyone would celebrate and be like, "Yay, they're getting married." But then the dude would leave for an unknown amount of time. And he would go back to his father's village or camp or tribe or whatever, and he would build a house for him and his wife. And his wife-to-be had no idea when he was going to come back. And so leading up to the wedding, a lot of fasting would go on. It's not eating in the sense of anticipation. It's, I don't know, like if I'm going to see an artist that I really like in a concert, I don't listen to their music beforehand because I want to fully appreciate it when it's live. It's a little bit like that. A lot of people, they take a break from eating food so that they can spend that time connecting with God. So if you don't know what fasting is, that's what fasting is. But then the groom would come back, and then everybody would be like, oh, I guess it's time for the wedding. Yay. And so Jesus is basically saying, it's like, I'm still here. Why would people be fasting? It's when I'm gone that people will be fasting. So hopefully that clears up a little bit of the confusion. Joey explained the garments really well. He talks about wine and wineskins. Like wine was put in these pouches made of animal skin. I know it's weird, but the chemical process that happens with wine, it expands the fabric of the pouch. And if you put new wine in an old pouch, the skin is already stretched out as much as it can go. So you always put new wine in a new wineskin. And you guys will get to talk and figure out kind of like what he means by that, but at least so you understand the illustration. He's saying if you put new wine in an old wineskin, there's no room for it to stretch, and it will leak and explode, and wine will get anywhere, it can't hold it. But if you put new wine in a pouch that is still stretchy, then it'll stay there, like that can hold it, and that's pretty cool. Okay, then there's the whole Sabbath thing and picking grain. Did you have any thoughts on that? It's okay if you don't. I'm just curious.
Yeah, and you know, it's the same kind of idea as earlier, as Jesus is talking again in this section about ushering in new traditions, whereas maybe some of the old traditions are not quite outdated.
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite the best word for it. More like the new traditions Jesus is ushering in is catered more towards the people, and not like and everybody, anyone and everyone, not just the Jewish people. You know? Because often back in those days, they would be very exclusive with their traditions, especially when Gentiles were concerned. Gentiles being non-Jewish people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you remember us talking about the Pharisees, they had really good hearts behind what they were doing. They believed the reason why that Rome had conquered Israel is because they weren't following the rules that God had laid out for them. And they believed that if everyone just started following the rules, then God would rescue them. So they got really frustrated with people who wouldn't follow the rules because they thought it's because of you that we are still being controlled by a foreign government. If you would just follow this simple rule, God will rescue us again. But I think that kind of well, maybe this is giving too much away. Let's say this. They weren't very stretchy.
Old wineskins.
Yeah. They weren't very stretchy. So they talk about this thing called the Sabbath. The Jewish people, they would take a break once a week, and they wouldn't do any work. And this was supposed to be this kind of celebration of man, we work all the time. We can rest at least one day a week because God is in control and he loves us. Even when we don't work, this is really great. But they got really strict about the rules of that. Jesus talks about this story that happened with David and Goliath. David was running away from this guy who wanted to kill him, and he didn't have any food, and he was running away with his friends. And because they were so hungry, they went to the temple, and they asked the priest for some food, and the priest said, all the food that we have is the bread that we have inside of the temple, and this bread is only for God. But the priest made an exception, and he went into the temple, brought the bread out, and gave it to David and his friends. So that kind of gives you a little bit of context for this story when Jesus is like, well, don't you remember about when David did pretty much the exact same thing? If he can do it, why can't I? And then he talks about, Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, which he's going to say a lot. This is Jesus's, if you remember, Jesus is kind of secretive. He doesn't really, when he did those miracles in the beginning, he's like, please don't tell anybody about this. For some odd reason, he's not wanting to draw too much attention to himself. But if he ever calls out what he is, his most favorite thing to call himself is the Son of Man, which comes from this story in the book of Daniel, chapter 7. And Daniel, his story is a whole other story. But he has this dream that humanity was getting destroyed by these beasts. But then he saw this flaming chariot, and on this chariot was a throne, and it was God's throne, and next to him was this empty throne. I know this is kind of wild. God ends up destroying these beasts and rescuing humanity, but then it says, on a cloud came up someone like a son of man, which just means he looks like a human being. And he sat down on the empty throne next to God to rule with him forever. So God destroys this great enemy, and then someone who looks like a human being sits next to God and rules with him. You can probably put the pieces together there, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. So, yeah. So these are just little bits of context that might help you have a better conversation. But I want to at least give you kind of like a basket to hold all these things in. Like, Jesus is... He's doing a few things. He's shaking things up. He's showing people who he is, and he's letting people know that things are about to change in a pretty big way. And that's kind of what ties all this stuff together, is Jesus is slowly revealing who he is and letting people know that change is coming. So, I don't know, do you have any final thoughts?
Keep an open mind.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That's good. All right, guys, I hope you have fun talking about this. Joey, thank you again for joining us.
Yeah.
All right.
Good being here.
We'll see you later.